through all videos, to all those movies that were on there, and all the Q&A and analysis that was given, and, you know, the different kinds of things that you talked about that were happening in your cities. The main important thing here, the most important thing, is that you take what you learned in that class and you put it into action in your organizing. And if you aren't already organizing, that you take what you learned in that class and you begin organizing using that information. Because what you will find doing that is that everything that you think you may have learned in that class was either wrong, or that you didn't actually learn anything at all. It was actually the practice that you engage in that highlights all of the, gives you the context of it, gives you the ability to take that information and to put it into the context of your own local conditions in your own community. And then through that, you actually learn. Through the didactic of me telling you, Shaka telling you, Tom telling you about pantherism, it's actually kind of a dialectical relationship between a didactic, your own study, and practice. So before we do the Q&A and we have our discussion period about the course and what people intend to do with the information that they have gained from it, I want to show you an example of the course, not all of it, some of it, put into practice. So I'm going to show you the high thermon intercommunal garden, because this is an example of organizing work. And I will do a Q&A session with you all on this, because it will highlight some skills that you should develop. So I'm going to put my phone, I'm going to turn the camera around so you can see this. So this right here, but the purpose of this was to pull in neighbors of an oppressed community, and we are living here in a food desert, in a poor community, decently policed community as well. It was to pull all the neighbors together toward a common goal of lessening their burden in the food desert that is this city. There isn't a store in the city that you can buy food in, at least the majority of the food that you and the food that you can buy is low quality, and, you know, pretty expensive. So we wanted to solve that problem by building a garden that the neighborhood can help develop, and that would meet their needs for a healthy diet. So I'm going to ask you all the question, and the floor will be open on this question, but just try to stick to this, to the content of the question. We don't want to go into an analysis yet, but what do you think the first step was to get the lot that I'm standing on? And the floor is open, so anybody who wants to chime in, feel free to. Anybody want to guess? Taking. Sorry, you broke up. What's up?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, I would say the first step would be taking the land.
Right. Now, you have 3 ways of doing that. You have the legal way, which is where you contact some realtor or you contact the city or what have you, contact the owner, and then you give them the money because that lot would be on the market. The second way is the illegal way. You don't ask anybody, and you do what you want with it. And you don't have any legal process that you put into motion to secure your claim to that land. And then the third way is a gray area. It's both legal and illegal at the same time. This can involve adverse property claims. This can involve HUD housing takeover. This can involve, a variety of different mechanisms that you can employ. Now, what I would argue that we did was we did it through a kind of a gray area, because we found out that the city that we are in here actually doesn't mind that we're doing this. But they told us that if somebody were to buy this land, then we would have to move our stuff on it. What they don't know is that we would not be willing to do that. So it can very quickly move into the illegal zone. But I would argue that this is kind of a gray zone. And this is a stepping stone for us here, because the long-term plan is to get an office set up. But since this property is basically a stone's throw away from all of our houses, it's much easier for us to get the hang of property takeovers. Now, let's say you get the property. You got the first step, right? What are you going to do with that property? Are you going to build a building? Are you going to build a garden? Are you going to run programs from it? What is the goal? My question to all of you is, in your local community, how best would an empty lot or an empty building serve that community? And I hope that this question will help you think critically about the material conditions in your own communities. So the floor is open, and feel free to chime in.
Chairman, let me chime in for 1 second. There's a number, before other comments chime in, this Shakur Zulu, there's a number of people you said graduated. I want to first acknowledge these comrades, because the New African Black Panther Party got a button for them. We want to send them a button to acknowledge and appreciate their graduation. And we want the other comrades in the Panther Revolution to appreciate them as well. So let's call these comrades out that you said graduated. Then we'll go through that other schematic thing you laid out about property and stuff like that. But first, let's acknowledge the comrades that graduated.
Absolutely. All right, so that would be Comrade Sparkle. That would be Comrade Allen. It's Comrade Rob. It's Comrade Cassandra. Comrade Chrissy. We had a couple more too. Who were they?
All right, so let's do it this way. Let's call Comrade General Secretary Sparkle. Comrade General Secretary Sparkle's on the line?
No, she is not on right now.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know how. Let's acknowledge the comrades that are on the line, but then I'll talk to them about getting them a button for their graduation and stuff like that.
All right. So that's Cassandra and Rob and Matthew and Zen.
Out to the people. Okay, so how do you want to do it? You want to take that and line the names that you just laid out? Let's call on comrade.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say I was gonna call on Carmen Zen to give us a synopsis of her experience in the UPL, the material that she read, and then we'll take it from there. Go down the list. The rest is
Okay.
Zen, if you want to speak up on that, you have to.
Okay. I had to unmute my mic there. Sorry to the folks watching on the stream if you're getting a double of my voice. It does some feedback sometimes, but I really found the course material to be enlightening, as far as the history of the Panthers, as well as how we can bring those things into a modern day context, like with what you're doing over there at the garden, because that's important to build that dual power first. If we're going to survive actually bringing forth a revolution to change the way things are run here, we have to be independent from this system first and foremost as communities. That means we got to make sure we've got access to food, we've got water collection things set up, things like that, so that we can actually provide those things to our communities if and when supply chains completely drop, because right now this is very applicable because our food supply chain is being messed with. There's countless food production factories, whether it be chicken and eggs, things like that, baked goods, whatnot, that have burned down in the last year. I think there's around 25 of them in the last year that have burnt down, major facilities. We're seeing trouble with our shipping as well. We still have hundreds of boats sitting off the coastline full of all of the things that people order and purchase on a regular basis. So capitalism is eating itself right now. It is completely crumbling. So these things like what you're doing over here at the community garden are essential to get implemented. I think that really is the first step of taking these things and putting them into action in our communities first and foremost. Not that it's not important to go out and march and draw attention to social injustices. That is very important. But this is the actions where we can do something about it directly.
all power to the people. Thank you. The comrade said. I was going to go ahead and then call out Comrade Allen.
He's not here as well.
Okay, let's call out Comrade Rob. Is Comrade Rob here?
Yeah, all power. I'm going to say, with my experience, I'm going to say I'm so appreciative. As someone who's studied about the Panthers a lot before, there's a lot of things that I didn't know. Like I hate saying this, but I never read into George Jackson as much as I wish I've done before, and that was a huge thing, because I think how the Panthers' history gets mainstreamed so much, they don't talk about a lot of things that they want to keep hidden, and I think that being able to really learn Pantherism through the eyes of actual Panthers and the actual history, how it should be taught, is a breath of fresh air, and it helps clarify and understand, and it's imperative that the legacy continues and the legacy moves forward. It's easy to put on a Panther T-shirt, or it's easy to just say that you're a Panther, but when the education is so important, being that not just fall. It's easy to fall into the face value of it. It's cool to be a Panther. It has that appeal, and this is when we learn the history of the appeal that came from from the Panthers that there's under the surface, the education is the blueprint, is the fundamentals, is what pushes everything forward. Now, and without that, it's just a bunch of people, as Fred Hampton used the terminology, scatterbrain. You know, I think that this gives so much clarity to what it means to be a Panther, even though there's a lot more to get into. This right here, the Hasan Shakur class, I appreciate it. Something that I'm gonna keep, teaching myself to others and those around me. That's a lot of what I want to say. I can get into a lot more aspects of it, but the biggest word I think I use is appreciation. It's so much appreciated and it's so much needed. So all power to that.
All power to the people. Thank you for the comrade. Comrade Matthew.
Hi, can you hear me?
All power to the people.
All power. I appreciate you guys having me. I'm fairly new on my leftist journey, and obviously very new in this group too. I'm in a place right now where I do have a small farm, and I set it up originally in a capitalist model, maybe in a way that skirted taxes and avoided regulations, but it was still me producing and trying to make a profit on it. And the more I learn and the more I see about the world, I'm looking for ways to evolve that, and learning, the mission that the Panthers had and have is the way that I can evolve. I don't even want to say my business model, more like the way that I fit into this community. I've lived in food deserts before. I lived in downtown Detroit. I lived in some rough parts of Las Vegas. I know what it's like not to just be able to get groceries. For me, has been a huge evolution, and I'm looking forward to continuing the process.
All power to the people. And I should announce to the comrades that we will be visiting the farm. It's here in New Jersey. We're going to use it to educate, agitate, and liberate some of these vacant gardens. We're going to start there at the farm, though. And thank you for that, Comrade Matt, for even extending that invitation to the comrades out in North New Jersey. All power to the people.
All power. I'm excited about it. Thank you.
Who else we have on, Comrade Chairman Jake, that graduated?
All power to the people. It's me, Cassandra. So I'll probably be the last on, I guess. So, I've already been on, like, I know with the sustainability and the gardening and all of that, that's stuff I've already been wanting to do. As far as the class, I learned a lot. I also wasn't up on George Jackson as much. I do think, I want to stay in the class. I really want to do it again. Go another 8 weeks, because I think it's so many other things to put in there too, like El Cleaver's book. We got Fred and Angela Davis Asada's book, Mark Huey. I don't know. I could keep going and going. I think learning, knowledge is the continual process, anyways. And it touched on. I enjoyed the class. It touched on a lot of stuff, but I think it would take us a whole year of classes to really just get down to the history, at least for the history. And everything, I'm just glad that I have people like-minded and stuff that we can start getting really. And I appreciate it. I like the class. I think I'm horrible. I know I'm still shy. Okay. All power to the people.
All power to the people. Now, that was a beautiful explanation, comrade. All power to the people. Jake.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you now. But first, I want to ask you gather all the comrades information so we can send them a button, a Rainbow Coalition button, Black Party button, to just appreciate their graduation. So we could gather their addresses.
For sure.
All right, all power.
All power. So, the way this class started is because this is both a class and a congratulatory / graduation for you all. And the reason why I'm taking the time to explain this garden is because there's something that can be abstracted from it that works in all circumstances. And it's really, it gets down to, like principles of organizing. And, as I was telling you all, the set of classes that you took, it's not going to motivate you. It won't compel you to go out to the world and do work around it. And I think seeing that work in practice might be something that would help. So, the first, as we were laying out, the first step, and it doesn't have to be finding property. It could be a multitude of different things. Instead of finding property, your first step might be, building connections with people in your area who would do work with you. Your first step might be, if you already have that, your first step might be finding a table and clothes and food or medical supplies or other household things. Your first step could be different things. But for us, we already had the resources we needed. We didn't need to source tools. We didn't need to source people to do work or to work with, because that was already built through our organizing. So our first step was property, and we didn't need to do programs because there's already a program that we work with. And more programs come out of us taking over our property. So think about, in your area, what's the first step for you? How can you put this into motion? How can you get motivated to put it into motion? Because that might actually be the first step. It might not even be that, you feel like you have the ability mentally or the resources physically to put something in motion. So you might think, well, how can I get motivated to do this in the first place? So if you had a lot, if you had people to organize with, what would be the first thing that you would do for your community? And I really, we won't really do a Q&A on it. I just want you to think about it. Because if we did do a Q&A, you would find that all of us would give different answers. Because all of us have different conditions in our community. You might not live in a food desert. You might live somewhere, somewhere with more pressing demands, like the buildings are dilapidated, or the homelessness is widespread, or drug addiction is widespread. These kinds of other conditions. It might be your water supply is contaminated. So there might be other conditions that you would organize around. But thinking about these things, if you wanted to organize around one or more of those conditions, think about the material things that you would need to do to make that a possibility. We didn't have access to wood chips, for example. We didn't have access to wood. None of us had these things available on hand. We didn't know where we would find them. So we did things like go on Facebook Marketplace and find things for free. We did things like utilize different apps and websites that will drop off raw materials for free. We did things like source seeds for free or at low cost. We are in the process of building connections in this community with this garb. That's something that's going to need to develop even further. We don't have utilities on this land. How would we bring water here? And it might be different for you because, hey, you might be dealing with a building that you want to rehab or something like that. Well, how are you going to resource, say, copper wire to fix fixtures, etc.? I mean, the list can go on and on depending on what you're doing. So I just urge you to think about different ways that you could build connections with key people in your community to bring about solving some of the problems in those communities, and where you might source the things that you need to solve those problems. Because we live in one of the most resource abundant societies on the planet. There are people in countries that don't have the access to resources that we have, that build massive gardens, that organize thousands of people, that provide for the needs of whole towns and villages, large sections of the city. Without the access to resources that we have, since we live in an overabundant society, many of the resources that you need to solve a problem can be found at low cost or at no cost. And so you might think you don't have everything going for you when it comes to organizing, but the truth is that you actually do. And what allowed us to do the work that we did out here in such a short amount of time is the fact that we had people on our side. If I were alone out here doing this work from the start, it wouldn't even be half as close to finished as it is now. But each person we add multiplies our ability to do work tenfold. So just keep this in mind. Now, with that, I want to open the floor for a Q&A about how we can improve this class. So that's the question. So what ways do you think we can improve this course? Or what ways can the people who provide the course improve their ability to teach it? And I will put the floor to all of you. You can feel free to speak up, any of you. Is there any of the material that you think we should adjust, anything like that?
Well, one of the other facets where we need to build dual power is access to proper health care. So maybe if anybody has friends who work in health care who would be willing to contribute some of their time and skills to help people in the community that can't access it, things like that.
Well, the question is particularly as it pertains to the class, the course material, the way we teach the class.
Gotcha.
I'm surprised. We got Tom. Go ahead, Tom.
Well, I was just thinking that a lot of people talk about dialectical materialism or Marxism-Leninism as being both a microscope and a telescope. On the one hand, it enables us to look into things beyond their appearances like a microscope, but it also enables us to look down the road to see what conditions are going to be like in a few years. And the Serve the People programs that we're starting now, like the garden or food giveaways or health programs, we got to think ahead when the system is in such deep crisis that, food may be out of the reach of a large percentage of the people. And we've seen happen in food crises elsewhere, particularly in the third world, where the food is there, but people can't afford to buy it in large numbers, in mass. Or where we have a pandemic where the hospitals just basically shut down and are unable to deal with the medical crisis. And if our programs, if we're approaching dual power, and our programs are able to address these issues in a large way, then the masses are going to side with us in any kind of struggle with the government. Because the government will be the one that's let them down and kicked them in the teeth, and we're the ones that are helping to feed them, to clothe them, to educate their children, and so forth. So every little thing we do now is like planting a seed for what we want to grow to be in the right space at the right time when the crisis becomes general. We can't look at things as how they were in the past so much as we have to look at how things are going to be down the road. And there's a lot of indicators if we use the science of Marxism, Leninism to tell us what that's going to look like. So that was what I wanted to add.
Yeah, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit. I mean, this is a phenomena that was seen, not only in the example that I will give in a second, but all over the world, many different examples. But this was seen in the Russian Revolution. It was the case that the provisional government that they had there wasn't able to commission things like barges down a river. It took them 3 months to do what it took a local Soviet to do in a week. And it was things like this, widespread all across society, meeting the demands of the masses, in which the Soviets were outpacing that government. And this is part of the reason why the masses sided with them. It's why they won their civil war. And it's what allowed the Soviet Union to come into existence and be the first proletarian worker state. And it is that example. Obviously, the conditions in Russia don't match what's happening here, but we can abstract that concept and apply it universally. The idea that we can build organizations that can meet the demands of the masses better and cheaper than the government can. And through that practice, we can bring the masses onto our sides, especially if we organize knowing where the country is going. What are the indicators? What are the crises we're going to face? If we can organize around getting ahead of the masses in this regard, when they catch up to us, we'll be ready to solve their problems. So the floor is still open if anybody wants to elaborate on the class. Or go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, what do other people think about what we just talked about?
Don't be shy. We love discussion. When one person speaks up, it helps the rest. So,
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up something I think that correlates with the class. The question of that is kind of what we're dealing with right now. I think some people do have reservations when asking questions, and I think sometimes when being on a Zoom call or being on live or something like that, sometimes people refrain from asking questions when they don't quite understand something, and having that extended arm or that ability to follow up where people are having that maybe a night course or something of the class, so to speak, where it goes from we have people who aren't following and grasping as much as someone else in the class. Maybe a terminology like dialectics or something like that, where it's like, can you elaborate that on a little longer, where we don't hold the class up, where I feel like I can just go and, there's maybe a tutor or something that go to where to really get a broader understanding. Because there is a lot within the class. There's little things that have like a whole historical context to really dive into, or a whole entire, definition that needs to be elaborated on, that could really spark something into someone's mind. They're like, okay, now I get, I just, because I swear at 2 a.m, I wish I could just, call one of you in the class and be like, hey, can you help explain this? But it's not, I mean, that wouldn't be very considerate, but you understand what I mean.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, we were discussing internally that particular issue. And, the next time this class is provided, it's probably going to be provided by Dominic Bruno. And I'm sure he'll make either himself or I'll volunteer for it, be available for that particular circumstance, because that's something that needs to get solved. So. We have any other things with the class?
Are you guys able to hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi, all power. I just wanted to say, for me, this is like the first time that it's really been quite this open as far as the classes or the meetings go. And I always find myself, I never say anything because I'm just trying to absorb everything and I'm trying to listen to everybody else's point of view. But if there was like one specific pointed question, instead of like a piece of a lecture, and then does anybody have a commentary on that? Because like there's 37 things rolling around in my head. If there was one, like to encourage the discussion is what I'm trying to say. If there was one focus pointed question and then everybody could give a brief answer to that, I think it would make things flow a little bit. If that makes sense.
Right, yeah. And this is another thing that was discussed internally. Coming up with, like you said, like one question for each of the pieces in one of the weeks. So I don't know how many items we have. I haven't counted all of them. Let's say there's 47 items. There'd be 47 questions, like total throughout the 8-week class. And I agree with you. I think that would help a lot. I do think that there should be a two-sided thing to the discussion, though, where we have that open-ended part. So start with, okay, how would you answer this question? And it would pertain directly to that we're talking about. And then the next part would be, do we have any commentary on that material? How can we analyze this further? Kind of like a critical analysis part of it.
For sure, I would agree with that. And I think, that critical analysis piece is going to be where most of the veterans are going to feel comfortable speaking up, and a lot of the noobs aren't going to have that critical analysis yet because there's just so much information to take in. I like the way that you framed that, though.
Yeah. And, you know, the other thing as well regarding beginners and the more advanced people that we discussed was potentially having two courses where one course covers specifically the beginner people, and it doesn't deviate, and it's just a question, you know, and then that more advanced course would have would be geared toward the more advanced people, and they would have both the question and the analysis period. But the one thing that I want to try to get to is developing beginners' ability to provide that analysis. You know, because a lot of people who are new to political education, they when they get put into a room with a whole bunch of advanced people, and everybody is providing, you know, very advanced analysis on, you know, whether it's their own conditions or wider conditions or whatever it is, they feel like their analysis wouldn't match up, like it would be subpar, and and that discourages people from developing their ability to do that, you know. And I don't want to be able, I don't want to hinder people's ability to do that. So we should have probably like Rob was saying, like the weekend class and then a night class, and then we divide the advanced from the beginners in that way. But also the advanced class would be a means of somebody catching up too, because if they miss a course earlier in the week because of a scheduling conflict, then they can attend the other class, you know. So any other ways we can improve?
Well, I think in general, it's always important to keep going back to basics, no matter how advanced you get with something. You know, like you talk to somebody who's like the best batter in baseball, and he'll say that constantly going back and working on the basics of his stance and how he holds the bat. And, you know, that like I was reading a quote the other day where it says usually when things aren't going well, it's because we're violating or forgetting some basic principle of Marxism-Leninism. And the more principles you know, the harder it is to not overlook some of them. You know what I mean? When you only know a few principles, you focus on what you know. The more nuanced your thinking gets, the more blind spots you're going to have. And that's why it's important for advanced people to keep going back to the basics and staying grounded in it, rather than, you know, like if you forget about physics and just concentrate on quantum physics, you'll end up where you can't type it. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. So, anything further on the on what we can improve with the course? All right. Well, we'll wrap this up. So thank you all for attending our 8-week course. We're gonna try to sit down and reflect on how this 8-week course was given. So we may have a week or 2 week period where we discuss the pedagogy internally, and then after that period, we'll be providing this class again. So I thank all of you, and I congratulate you. And I'll be contacting you to get your information.
All power to the people. I want to thank you too, comrades.
There you go.
And I'll see you at the Wednesday study. All power to the people.
All right, all power, guys.
All power.
All power. All right, thank you all for joining us today. We'll be back Wednesday with the reading group. So see you then. All power to the people.
We don't make mistakes. We have happy accidents. Just don't worry about it. Learn how to use what